Hello and welcome to Rise, a collaborative storytelling tabletop role-playing game, otherwise known as a TTRPG, tabletop role-playing game. Rise is a custom game that I've designed, developed almost entirely by myself with the assistance at times of some friends, and I'd like to teach you guys all today about what is a tabletop role-playing game, what are some of the unique features of Rise, what sets Rise apart, some of the world of Rise. It does involve storytelling and world building, and then what is Rise Resolve? And Rise Resolve is my solution for a new type of game that is accessible and easy to play and get into and jump in and out. So just to begin with, as an introduction to what a tabletop role-playing game is, it is a really any kind of game in which there is a group of players that is guided by a game master, or sometimes called a dungeon master, depending on the game that you are playing. This generally involves rolling dice to determine outcomes, and it's all about fostering an environment of chance and creativity. It's storytelling. There is generally one game master that is guiding the game, and the players are there with their fictional characters to act out, improvise, and help tell a story. So the role of the players and the game master, the players' roles are to react to what the game master is providing. Many people think it's a antagonistic relationship between the players and the game master, and I don't think that's the case. It shouldn't be the case. The game master, or GM, is there to craft a world and provide scenarios and provide context, to be a narrator, to ask questions, and to act out the other characters, what we would call the non-player characters, or the NPCs. And the players, their entire role is to be reactive, to respond to what the game master is serving and providing. It's all supposed to be done via improv. There's not supposed to be a script or a prompt. Sometimes the game master will craft a game that is attempting to tell a linear story, but the players are not necessarily characters in a book that the game master can control how they're going to react. It's supposed to be a game where everybody has fun and agency, and so it's often best told in vast open settings where even the game master doesn't know how the story is going to end. It is really important that in tabletop RPGs, that a collaborative storytelling and narrative building is the key focus, that the players and the game masters are working together, that the players make actions and make decisions, and these actions and decisions should actually shape and change the outcome of the story that the game master maybe was envisioning. And that's what's so fun about this for everybody involved. See, if the game master already knew everything that was going to happen, it would be more of a job, or it wouldn't be as fun and engaging for them. And for the players, if their actions and what decisions they made didn't impact the outcome of the story, they would feel like they're simply observers and that their decisions make no impact on what's to come. So a little bit more about tabletop RPGs, some of the more popular ones and the genres that they generally fit into. So the most popular one is called D&D, or DND, or Dungeons and Dragons. Now these search results here are from 2021, I believe, but there are some other very popular ones here: Pathfinder, Starfinder, Shadowrun. Some of them are branded, such as the Star Wars RPG. Others are something that someone made up. D&D, I believe, has been around since the 70s, so some of these have a good amount of history, but as you can see, D&D is by far and large the most popular, if not, since 2021, probably even more popular than this. And now the genre, it's almost, I'd say, very, very commonly a fantasy genre, although science fiction and modern are, I'd say, the next most common, modern just being set on Earth in modern day. Science fiction could be anything from a future on Earth to space travel. And then there are some smaller subgenres that sometimes can also take place. Some of these subgenres, such as horror, can also be combined with fantasy, for example, to be a fantasy horror genre. So a little bit more about the unique features of Rise itself, moving on from some of those other information just in general about tabletop role-playing games. So Rise is the system that the game is based off of, which is separate from necessarily the genre of the game or the type of world that the game is set in. However, the majority of Rise is set in a sci-fi fantasy world, although we will get more into the different worlds that Rise is a part of. So the core mechanics, the core gameplay elements of Rise is that it is a 3d6 system, meaning that all of the rolls, all of the dice are done with 3 or sometimes more or less, but generally all players have 3 6-sided dice. Some of the other games involve the players needing to purchase and own multiple different types of dice with 20 sides, dice with 10 sides, 8 sides, 4 sides, and I did not want to make a game that would exclude people who didn't have the dice already, and I didn't want to have to provide a game that you would have to buy extra dice just to play. Most people at home have, if not already in some other game that they own, a few dice, and what I like to do as the game master when I play the game is I just bought a whole bunch of dice. They were not very expensive to buy 6-sided dice in bulk, and then every one of my players can use them. Another key aspect of Rise is the character creation and progression. The reason I made Rise in the first place was because I am so passionate about the players being able to make any kind of character that they could ever imagine or think of. Again, most of this is within a science fiction or fantasy setting. Some of these terms, such as classless character creation, classless means that the player is not locked to a single class. So that means that when they create their character, they come up with their character based off of following the rules and writing them down either on a piece of paper or on the digital character sheet. They're not stuck following a single path for their character. It also has many intricate races, and there are many backstories. There are fantasy races involved. They all have custom names, but there are similar concepts, such as elves are not called elves in Rise, but they are called something called the Vasari. There are humans. There are dwarf-type characters called Orions. There's many backstories that the player can choose from, and player archetypes. There's a very complex leveling system based off of points. Every time the player levels up, they are awarded points to spend on what they want to choose their character to progress towards. There are different specializations. There's talents. There's attributes. There's so many different things, I believe, that make Rise very unique. And the main one, though, is the leveling system. Last time I checked, trillions of different permutations, high level of different ways that a character can be designed, created, and customized. The progression is meaningful. They're not stuck in one path, which I believe really helps show that there is a character growth through the storytelling of Rise as well. I believe that locking a player to one type of playstyle, such as a knight or a wizard, while it can be interesting, it doesn't really match up with the true narrative and character growth element that I wanted to see in Rise. So as a player is playing the game over a long period of time, maybe they have experiences or things happen to their character where they want to shift their direction and move in different ways and take different leveling options and abilities and powers that more so match how their character is interacting with the world. So moving on from some of the character curation and what makes Rise as a mechanics of Rise unique. The world of Rise that I've developed, there are a few, but the main one that I've spent the most time on is this world called Elara. Here is just a sneak peek of the map. And this is the setting that many of the stories that I've been using for Rise have been set in. It is a science fiction and fantasy exo-moon. It's lots of... I have a physics background, so I thought some interesting astronomy would be very cool here. It is still a high fantasy world, but it has sci-fi elements. It just means that there's swords and magic, but also there's technology and guns and things like that. And it has a very complex history and lore and all sorts of things that you would expect to see in any well-fleshed-out fantasy world. So another setting that could be possibly used for Rise is just a modern setting on Earth in which perhaps the concepts of magic are hidden from the rest of the world, but it is a secret subset of people who have access to magic and these interesting abilities. And then finally, I have a setting that I've been still working on and is in the development cycle. It would also involve a separate mechanics of the game, but I'm calling it Rise Infinite, and it would be set in the entirety of our universe. So it's still in a conceptual phase, but it would be a full power fantasy RPG where there is no maximum level, but there also wouldn't be player-driven character creation. The GM would assign points based off of how the GM would assign abilities and give the players options based off of how they interact with the world. So if that's something you're interested in, I'm working on that and spending a lot of time on that. That's my next big endeavor. And then finally, I want to talk about Rise Resolve, or what I was calling it before, kind of Rise Light. I wanted to move away from the term light because that implies that there's, I don't know. I don't like the terminology for light, and resolve for me is a key element of this more accessible and easy to play version of Rise. So to explain what I mean by that, I wanted Rise Resolve to have a simplified game system to focus on more of the intuitive elements that people are able to understand when they first start playing a game, and to have the focus instead being on the mechanics, to be on the role playing and the crafting a story and the getting into a character and the improvisation and acting in a group. I wanted it to encourage creativity and problem solving, and for there to be a truly collaborative environment that is less focused on dice rolling and crunching numbers and looking at a sheet, and more focused on the interactions between people. Not that the other version of Rise doesn't have many of those things, but this one's much easier for a beginner to jump into. So in Rise Resolve, the role of the GM, and many of these, again, are overlaps from the core version of Rise, but I wanted the GM here, or Game Master, to focus on being a storytelling narrator, to be a neutral and curious observer and questioner, as well as to provide elements of conflict for the players. Some of these examples of elements of conflict could be all of your players, as maybe a narrator would say, as you approach the city gates, you see that there is a guard standing in front of the gate, and he is not going to let you past. He questions where you're coming from. How are you going to proceed? And the players here, this is a form of conflict. It's not combative. It's not necessarily a battle. I want to focus less on combat and violence in this. Not saying that the players could not choose to say, oh, well, I want to challenge the guard to a duel to let me in. That could be a form of combat. They could say, I want to try to sneak into the city. Or they could try to figure out a way to convince the guard to let them in the city. So this conflict, it's, I believe, a really important element for creativity and driving a narrative. And then as the players decide on how they want to progress, the game master would say, oh, that's very interesting. Why did you choose to make that approach? Did you think of other approaches? And they don't have to ask too many questions, but I think it's really important to ask, why did your character choose to do this? And to always put it back on the character instead of the person playing the character. I think it's most fun and engaging when the players are able to get into a character and not focus on what they as a person would do, but how is this character reacting to things. It also helps mitigate less real life conflict and put the conflict into a fantasy game instead. So then finally, I believe that this Rise Resolve is most designed for children. I have a young daughter, and I'm soon to have a son, and when they get older, I want to be able to play these kinds of games with them without them being limited by the mechanics or dice rolling or needing to focus and memorize all these rules. Same thing with RPG beginners. This could be for anyone of any age who's never played a RPG or role-playing game, whether it's a tabletop role-playing game or a role-playing video game with fewer rules and the streamlined gameplay. I believe this is a system that anybody could jump into and pretty much learn within 5 to 10 minutes. And then finally, any players with special needs. I know there's all sorts of dyslexia, dyscalculia, any other kinds of emotional needs or social issues that people might have with trying to comprehend all these rules. And so it was also designed for anyone, really, a super inclusive experience for all players. So to summarize, Rise, maybe I should call it Rise Classic, is focused on deep world building, whereas the Resolve is the storytelling. Really, Rise Resolve, you could jump into any kind of scenario, not need to know all of the backstory. I envision a lot of Rise Resolve could be one-off games. Every week you could play a different character, or you could play in a different world or a different setting, whereas Rise Classic maybe is every time you play, it's building off of what there was before. This long-term focus. The classic version of Rise has complex mechanics, whereas Rise Resolve has simplified rules. The classic version of Rise, many of the character abilities and powers are very focused on combat and battle, whereas the Resolve, the conflict system would be much broader and have a lesser focus on actual combat or fighting. And then Rise Classic has that rich character customization, whereas the Resolve minimizes as many character and mechanic-based things that the player has to keep track of as possible. So thank you so much for listening. I am very passionate about this game and this system, and I would love to work on this more. So if you're interested, please let me know. You could leave a comment, like the video, subscribe. Thanks so much.